these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
All right, welcome back, folks. Today we have another interesting conversation on counterterrorism, national security, and all things involved in that with Alex Plitsas. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Congressman.
We were just talking before recording, as I was just trying to get a feel for your life story. Based on your accent, your sounds like you're from Kansas or New York.
Native New Yorker, born and bred.
Yeah, and that's kind of what got you started down this life. And currently at Atlantic Council, leading a team of experts doing think tank work, analysis work, but not products.
Yeah.
I'm assuming all sorts of subjects, but mostly your focus is currently Middle East terrorism.
It's mostly counterterrorism, mostly Middle East focus, although it has branched out, especially with the cartel designations, and then do stuff on Ukraine as well, and then China and the Pacific.
And we'll get into all of those interesting stories. Okay, so you're New York, born and bred. 9/11 happens, and what are you doing at the time?
So I was a 16-year-old kid in Catholic high school. It was most people don't know, it was the first day of a Catholic school teacher strike, archdiocese-wide, the entire archdiocese. So there were about 800 guys, 200 of whose parents worked in Manhattan doing something, whether it be finance, cops, firemen. And so we all walk in. There's no teachers there. There's about 4 people and then 4 administrators. They split us in half, gym, auditorium. All of a sudden, word breaks that there's been an attack at the Trade Center, and everybody's kind of stunned. We get sent home. I lived in the city. The city was closed, and I'd been a volunteer fireman at that point.
Where was your school? So it happened while you were at school,
Yeah.
right?
So
I remember. I mean, were you in 10th grade or 11th grade?
It would have been 11th grade at that point.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we're the same age.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I was in 11th grade too. I was in another country, so it was even more confusing. But
that's wild.
was your high school in Manhattan or was it?
No, so it was in White Plains in Westchester, so just north of the city. So,
But you live in Manhattan.
But I lived in Riverdale in the city. My parents were oncologists at Columbia University in the city, so we lived there. And I'd grown up in Mamaroneck, and so I belonged to the fire department there as a junior at that time. And basically what happened was most people didn't have a good understanding. The Bronx came down, which is north of Manhattan, to cover northern Manhattan, because northern Manhattan collapsed down because so many guys had died to cover the south side. Brooklyn came into Queens. Queens came into southern Manhattan. So the Long Island volunteers came in to cover Queens, and then the Westchester firemen got called in to cover the Bronx. So by the time a couple hours later we show up at the firehouse, half the engines are gone. Almost all the firemen in town are gone. They're all running calls in the city.
You can be a volunteer firefighter at 16?
It's called the Explorers Program. So you basically start from 14 up to 18, and then you go through the academy afterwards. And to your point, that's a great question. That was the same look we got from most people for the 3 days afterwards when there's like a 14 to 16-year-old kid getting off a fire engine because there's a call at their house, and we're the adults. They're all in the city. So that was basically for a couple days afterwards. The attacks were a Tuesday, and then disobeyed our orders and basically went down to the Trade Center. I had gear, and I remember I showed up at Grand Central, and there was an FDNY captain who looks at me and goes, "How old are you, kid?" I was like 16. He goes, "Jesus, I got boots older than you." I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "Well, I haven't been in the academy." I was like, "I'm going to make sandwiches or something." I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And he said, "Well, can you use a bucket and a shovel?" I said, "Yeah, just get your ass on the bus. Let's go." And so bus down with a bunch of guys, and we ended up digging on the pile for Friday, and then I went back down on Saturday, and then Monday morning I'm back as a junior in high school, back at the class. So it was a very surreal experience. I had zero business being there, none whatsoever. But I figured...
it was just one of those all hands on deck kind of thing, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was stupid. I was a kid, and I don't have an appreciation for the suffering around me, so I felt like I needed to make it about me. I need to be there. I need to help. And in retrospect, as an adult, it's kind of embarrassing, but at the time I thought this was like the right thing to do.
I don't know. Retrospect, that seems about right.
Yeah.
And so were you thinking about, you said you joined the Army after that. Was that something you thought about anyway? Or was this like the spurring moment? It's interesting for different vets.
I mean, I had kind of toyed with it, and then I went to American in D.C. for undergrad, and it was some political science debate freshman year, and some kid stopped just short of saying we deserve 9/11 based on foreign policy. I'm getting ready to jump the desk. Yeah. And the professor breaks it up, and the kid got the parting shot from across the room. He's like, "All right, tough guy, if you feel so strongly about it, why don't you sign up?" And I had one of those oh shit moments. I'm like, oh, he's right. Went back to the dorms, had a beer. A stupid Army commercial came on. I called the recruiter. He's like, "Let me get this straight. You've never been arrested. You haven't done any drugs. You graduated from high school. You have a scholarship to college, and you want to voluntarily enlist in Army Special Operations and the reserves. I'm like, yes, don't move. I'll be there in 30 minutes.
We'll take it.
He showed right up.
So did you finish out college? Or?
I did. So I after my freshman year, finished pledging a fraternity, finished school, and then reported straight to boot camp. And then the only special
As
operations.
an officer, or
No, so I was still in college. I was still a freshman.
okay,
So
gotcha.
it was the whatchamacallit. It was the only special operations elements in the Army side and the reserve or civil affairs or PSYOP, and I didn't know what I was doing at this point. So I was like, let's go PSYOP.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Having no idea what that meant.
Army's totally different. I mean, you can't just like join the reserves in the Navy. It's not a thing as far as I'm aware, unless they changed it, right? You go after active duty, but in the Army, it's like a whole different career path.
Yeah, so there's the Guard, there's the Reserve, and then there's the active duty, like you said, and then even the states have their own militias. Like there's the Cal Guard in Texas as well. I think it's their own.
You can do that.
Yeah.
but like not with the Navy.
I never explored it because I don't know what I was thinking. I think it was the first
Yeah.
commercial that came on, and I called like a moron, and I was like, "This sounds like a great
Yeah.
idea." And then I basically took the semester off in the fall to finish up advanced training, and then reported in my unit, and then made E5 was up for E6, and then I was getting ready to graduate. I was supposed to commission Georgetown at ROTC, had left, and I was going to commission. And at that point, my unit got orders to leave for the surge in Iraq, and so it was either give up the deployment and then go commission or go. I wasn't planning to go active duty, and the whole point in joining was to go.
So what year was that? Is this
2007.
2007.
So we got deployed, and then so I was in Solder City for that fight in 2008. So platoon from SEAL Team 3, Chris Kyle came in, which actually as an Army guy was pretty embarrassing. The SF team that came in they acted like little bitches while they were there. It was actually the SEALs who came in and actually helped clean up, which was awesome.
Yeah.
We had a line of advance.
There's a lot of stories from that. I mean, it's SEAL Team 3, Charlie platoon.
Yeah.
I was the new guy on Fallujah on that
okay.
deployment, so
Okay.
I like finished my SEAL qualification training, got my trident, and then immediately went out to SEAL Team 3. So didn't get to go to Solder City because it was brand new, not even really platooned up yet. But and then I ended up in Basra for like months, and they like left me there. And then I got in trouble for being left there. I was like, guys, you
put me
it's
there.
the whole funny. Well, I was there to help SEAL Team 5 kind of rip out with rip out, I guess in military terms for the audience just means like replace.
Yeah.
SEAL Team 3, turn over.
Yep.
And it's like I'm just like this JG, just in trouble. Like first things, like before I'm even like assigned into a new platoon back home, it's like you weren't supposed to be out. You weren't supposed to be left out there. I'm like, well, the SEAL Team 5, I was a troop commander. I mean, he made me. Like, what do you want me to do? He's
Follow
like,
orders.
hey, we need you to stay out here and do stuff. And it's like this is before real cell phones and like it's I mean, nobody had iPhone. There's no way to communicate with each other in any real way. It was just kind of funny.
I remember that there was actually, I don't know if you remember him, there was a former Army enlisted paratrooper in the 82nd. He did like 4 years and then became a SEAL afterwards with a platoon. And the only reason I remembered is Chris Kyle's book came out, but I remember getting back to the jock after we had, it's in the movie like an American Sniper, but we were putting the T-walls up in Solder City, and we were all sitting out there with gun trucks, and I swapped out with my gunner as a TC, and I'm looking over the wall, and I hadn't engaged a target yet, and there's two guys coming. I'm like, oh man, rack the 240, and before I can open up, bodies down. I'm like, who is doing the shooting? It was Chris. And then somebody tried to recover the weapons off of them. They went down. By the end of the day, there was like 60 people stacked on the other side, and they were all bad dudes.
A large majority of his kills were definitely from that deployment.
Oh yeah.
Some of it's funny because he's, like, how does he have so many compared to other snipers? And the reasoning is one, he's on glass, like maybe probably a lot longer than most would be. Just stays on glass, meaning like he's just stays on scope.
Yep.
And he's just lucky. Like because they'll switch out like different positions, and there'd be nothing there all day. And then Chris Kyle would, switch out. And all of a sudden there's a bunch of action. Everyone else is like, what the hell? I mean, it's not fair.
It was crazy. There was literally 60 guys in one day. And I remember going back to the Joint Operations Center, and it was a bigger, stockier guy, an older too. I think he was a chief, so he had a little weight on him. And I remember they basically said they stuck him there because he could speak Army. So he got stuck as a liaison on the jock. And he was on the phone. I'm like, what are you doing? He's, we're calling back to Coronado. He's like, Chris got 60 kills. I'm like, I had no idea who he was at this point. None of this. So it wasn't until the RAND study on the battle came out, and then his book, that I went back and put it together because our team is called out in the RAND is in the order of battle for it. And I'm like, holy crap, that was him. He kept all of us alive, though. I mean, there were a number of attempts to put EFPs on the line, everything else, and there were dismounts all over the place. So I have no doubt.
Like kind of sneak in at night, build an Overwatch, had been pioneered by SEAL Team 3 like already.
Yep.
The deployment before the Battle of Ramadi. That's Jocko. Like that's
Yeah.
Jocko's famous 2-troop
Yeah.
story, and it's really just it's sneaking in somewhere, establishing a position, an Overwatch position with snipers and other forms of fire, as a support mechanism for conventional troops. I mean, that's the beauty of special operations, what it's for.
Yeah.
I've only met Chris once. Again, like while I was a new guy, he was just kind of coming through the talk on that particular deployment.
That was wild.
So Muqtada al-Sadr, I mean, that's his name, right? Muqtada
Mookie.
al-Sadr.
Yeah.
Right. Like he was just some cleric who got antsy. I mean, that was the thing about some of these conflicts, right? It's like we try to study terrorism and what it is, and I think it's messier than people realize.
Yeah.
Like in this case, it's like it's almost like a militia led by a cleric. I mean, yes, there's an ideology behind it, but a lot of it's just like, screw you guys. I mean, there's so many politics involved.
No, I mean that's the perfect characterization. So he descends from one of the families that has the clearest lineage back to the Prophet Muhammad that they can trace, and that's on the Shia side. So his
I hear that about a lot of Muslim leaders.
You get it, but there's for some reason his is supposedly like the clearest of the clear or something in the area. So that's at least the bloodline lineage where he gets his juice from, and his dad or his uncle were ayatollahs.
His sense of authority, or his wasta, as they would call it.
Yeah, his wasta. He was basically like a high functioning moron, though. I mean, he got help through Ayatollah mini school, like a Hojat al-Islam they call it when they go study their first level in Iran by Laith and Qais Khazili, who were two other militia leaders that we all fought on the ground in Iraq.
Yeah.
That was
That's right, because he was Shia.
Yep,
And
exactly.
That was an odd battle because it wasn't normal that we were fighting Shias. The Sadr City time frame was a different one.
Yeah, we were out. So Sadr City was off limits for 3 years because it was Maliki's
right.
political base.
Yeah, that's right.
And then Maliki started arresting a bunch of low-level Sadrist politicians to keep them out of the elections. And Mookie, as we call it, right, he was like, oh, no problem. We'll turn the militia on and see how you like it. And they overran the checkpoints, and there was essentially it was an army platoon-size element or a company, outpost turned into a brigade plus of armor. And block-to-block fighting for like 6 weeks. It was nuts.
Yeah.
But the civilians left, which I think is the other reason Chris had so much time on glass, because civilians are cleared off the battlefield. So if you were there, you were hostile.
Yeah, I remember those. The ROEs were pretty liberal.
Yeah. The only time I've been a fan of that, of liberal.
Yeah. yeah. Liberal isn't lax. But it's in this case, it's war. It's for good reason. Okay, so you go from there.
Yep.
And then it sounds like your background then slowly ends up more and more into the policy world and an intel world. So how did?
Yeah. So from there, I came back and I went to go work for the Joint IED Defeat Organization. They had a special activities division.
I remember that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They had a special activities.
Never
division.
figured out how to find IEDs. I mean, I found one.
Yeah. I was going to say, the hard way. Yeah. It's, the whole mission was supposed
We found
to be.
a bunch.
Unfortunately.
They were everywhere. Literally everywhere.
My favorite was when we called the Iraqi EOD team to get rid of it because the U.S. wasn't there. And they said, no, we called the U.S. They were going to take forever. The Iraqis walked up, picked up the IED, and threw it off the bridge in the river. And that was their main disposal. So, yeah, you're right. They were all over the place at that point.
They don't care. I've watched in Afghanistan. When I was in Iraq, the ID threat just wasn't a thing anymore. Even in 2008, I mean, Sadr City was the only real action happening.
Yeah.
We were back in 2010.
Yep.
Really just, at this point, we're kind of standing up like what should be like a judicial system and law enforcement.
Right.
And we're still doing ops, and we got into a couple gunfights, but like nothing crazy, and definitely no IEDs. And Afghanistan, Jesus. I mean, but Iraqis and Afghans are similar in this way. Like I've watched an Afghan get his legs blown off right in front of us. And then the Kazavat gets him out. And all the Americans are like, we're going to be really careful. We were being careful anyway, but like we're going to be extra careful because we're still moving through this village. Like it's not like we quit when somebody gets their legs blown off. And the Afghans just walk around. I'm like, they just don't. It's a weird sense of like not caring about your own life. They just it's a different mentality.
It's like a level of comfort I've never experienced. It's funny. 'Cause I was back in Iraq and 10 with you at that time, and we were running the special program shop, and we were going after the bomb makers of the networks and subverting the supply chain. So, yeah, it was the transition from Operation Iraqi Freedom to Operation, was it New Dawn or whatever or whatever they called it at that time? Operation Just Kidding. We were on the way out the door.
Yeah.
And then I went to Afghan in 12. I forget what year were you there?
Yeah, it was 12. Yeah.
Yeah. So you and I were on like the same schedule, 8, 10,
Yeah,
12.
we're on the same schedule.
Yeah. And then Ukraine 14.
Yeah, exact same schedule. So where were you in Afghanistan?
So at that point, I was working so after I left the JIDO rotation, went back to Iraq in 10, I got picked up by the Undersecretary for Intelligence in a special access program. And so I got sent to Afghanistan in 12, primarily in Kabul, back and forth to Bagram, but then out towards the Iranian border. I was running a special mission to go after the Iran nuke program.
Cool.
So I did that for a while.
Interesting place to end up in. I mean,
yeah.
What's funny about JIDO, it's like it's this organization designed to counter IEDs, and a big part of countering IEDs is figuring out like where they are on the ground.
Yep.
And it's like, why can't we just have like some little tool that just shows us, and that just doesn't exist, right? It's very difficult to create, which also like brings up something funny we've seen in the news recently about this group of researchers that claim they found like this giant underground structure underneath the pyramids. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I saw that.
And so and that. Maybe it was just like some people saying it was LiDAR. And I'm like, LiDAR can't see underground. Like it's just not. It's maybe a centimeter.
Yeah,
it's not what it's for.
No,
LiDAR is used for cool things.
It is,
but like finding ancient ruins in rainforests. It's not used for this. So like this is all just like this massive lie. I was so excited because I really want to believe there's a bunch of weird stuff going on under the pyramids, and I still think there might be. I'm just like, I'm not so sure. I'm like, guys, I'll tell people like we can't see bombs of like 6 inches under the ground. Right. I don't know what possible technology they're using to see cylinders and coils 2 miles down. Like it would be amazing if we had that kind of technology. It's amazing what we would do. Like we would do all sorts of things.
No, I mean we have the one of the biggest LiDAR companies in the U.S. is called Luminar Technologies, based out of Florida. I did their enterprise systems implementation, basically a big software package. And I mean, what it's able to do is incredible. Elon doesn't use it for Tesla, but it's basically like the laser equivalent of radar, bouncing out and coming back. So you can get a picture. But like you said, it's not penetrating. It's meant to hit and bounce back, so it doesn't give you depth.
I want to learn more about this. I mean, obviously, geologists have their way of like, looking for minerals and oil and things. But I'm just, and I want to believe. And when it comes to the pyramids, I want to believe.
I'm
like, trust me. I'm like, because that I'm like, I've always just going off topic here. I'm like, if the mud brick ramp theory is true, first of all, it's like the volume that would take is more than the pyramids itself. The volume of mud bricks. It's like, I guess with the absurd amount of manpower, but I'm like, if we can just drag these stones with a bunch of people, how about we just try it one day?
Why not?
Like, how come nobody is just show me that you can get the obelisk in one piece, like out of the granite stone and then 200 miles upriver. Like let's just do an experiment with a bunch of archaeologists, since you say that's the theory. Like I just don't believe it. Like I think they were just more advanced, or they have something that we're not thinking about.
What's that show, Man versus Myth, right? That was they go in there and see if you can actually get it done. This sounds like a good extended episode.
It'd be quite the episode. It's like, I think everyone knows, like, I don't care how many people you have on a rope pulling that freaking that giant block of granite.
It still weighs 50,000 pounds or whatever
it is.
It's
really heavy. Like it's just not moving. I mean, the pyramid is just fascinating. Egypt is the most fascinating place. I've never visited it.
I'm going soon, about a month from now. I can't wait. And that's one of the things I'm going to see, is to go see the pyramids for that reason.
The pyramid, spend one day in Cairo and then immediately get on a boat and do the Nile tour. So you see, I mean, it's just it's the most amazing country, and like just going down the Nile is it's really an incredible experience. I've done it twice, and I'm lucky that way. And it's then end the trip in Sharm el Sheikh with some good diving.
That's
best in the world.
Definitely on there. I can't believe you still dive after all the years in the teams.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fun diving, like warm water, clear water, in a place like the Red Sea. Otherwise, it's like no. And oddly enough, like I mean, I have no problem diving, but that's literally why I had to be medically retired, because on your dive medical, there's a specific question that asks about a hollow orbital. And they're like, well, we have to say yes. I'm like, well, it's not technically hollow. It's like people don't realize it. And I was like, it's literally like, that's why I can't be qualified to go deploy Meanwhile, people are like, well, what if I get a transgender surgery? Can I deploy? They're like, yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, that makes sense.
Double the amputees below the legs going over with prosthetics.
Yeah. Well, the Army's a lot better. It does depend on the service. The Navy just can't wrap their head around it because it's not really like a combat, service like the way the Army was. And the Marines are better too. Although that's part of the Navy, so I really don't know how to explain that one. So anyway, so you're doing that. You're just up in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Then we were talking before about your experiences, and then somehow you ended up in Ukraine in 2014.
Yeah, so I was in between just about starting with the undersecretary for policy within the assistant secretary for special operations. Basically, the Pentagon's a giant bureaucracy. There's 30,000 people, but the way its task works for folks who are listening is you have the secretary, and the secretary has their staff. So there's the unders and the assistant secretaries. Then there's the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, under the Department of Navy, the Air Force, that all have their own staffs there too. So one of the offices that deals with sensitive activities and special operations is where I worked and was coming in as chief. So I ended up in Ukraine in 14, just before taking that assignment. At the end of January, beginning of February, while the square was on fire, I was there just as the prime minister.
Let's do a quick history lesson. I mean,
yeah.
This is the source of a lot of misinformation.
Yep.
What happened there? There's like this, and people tend to use like these diplomatic cables from our own embassy to prove that we overthrew it. It's like, these are the most, read the cables. They're like the most bland conversation. They're like, I mean, we'd like it if this person won because they're more pro-American. I'm like, first of all, that's what our diplomats should be doing, is identifying who's pro-American.
Right.
And I would say openly supporting them.
Sure.
Like, that's literally your job. So the idea that it's some weird conspiracy is just so strange to me.
I mean, so I'm a Republican former party chair up in Connecticut, and I wrote about this in the Federalist in 2020, 2 years before the war kicked off. Mm-hmm. And I can kind of trace back the events from right now, almost going back to 2008 from the Russian invasion of Georgia, us really failing to hold them accountable. I mean, when you and I were there in Iraq, I landed back from R&R, and there's all the Georgian troops on the runway because there was an air bridge flying them back to go deal with the Russians.
That's right.
And nothing happened.
Yeah.
So fast forward, we're going into, now it's 14. I land there, and there's all of the Russian media. Oh, there's these anti-Russian, Ukrainian fascists running around all over the place. I got to Lviv and I got to Kyiv. There's butterflies and bees. Like, this is all fictitious horseshit. None of this is happening. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, this is kind of bizarre, and I'm getting a feel for what's going on the ground.
Because they're trying to say it's happening, like, even in the capital. And it's one thing to say there, because there are pro-Russia elements in the very far east.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not in the capital.
No, but I mean, you're 100% right. And the square was the reason it was all on fire. I met the deputy head of the security service while I was there on that trip, and kind of got some more insight into what was going on. So in 14, at that point, the Ukrainians were on the verge of signing an economic agreement with the European Union, and that came with military policy. And this deputy head of the security service in Ukraine told me that the year before he had gone back to Moscow to visit. He saw friends from the intelligence service corps, basically our equivalent of the CIA farm, but for them. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, if you guys sign off on this agreement, it's a bridge too far for us, and we're not going to allow this to sort of happen. Yeah. And they kind of waved their hands, and this is nonsense. So as I get there, now as a practitioner too, as a PSYOP guy, and then branched into deception and other, and I oversaw the information operations portfolio at the Pentagon especially for the sensitive stuff. I'm watching what's happening on the ground, and it became crystal clear. And again, I called this 2 years before the war started. This fictitious threat was basically cited for a domestic audience in Russia to give Putin what he needed to be able to take action, and also inside of Ukraine. And the purpose was the security services from the Russian side came in, and they propped up these opposition governments out east, where we're now known as the Donbas, the area along the Russian border.
Yeah, this is the little green men.
The little green men, right? And it was right before they got there. So
it's typical, what we would call unconventional warfare. Right?
Precisely, that's exactly what it was.
Warfare. We're trained to do. It's what the Russians are doing, right? You go in, you find a group that's sort of friendly to you, you prop them up, fund them, train them.
Precisely, and at this point, it's before any military services show up. I mean, so normally, like information operation, even PSYOP, what I did, it's like we always joked it puts the special and special operations, especially on the reserve side. This was like the low end of the totem pole. But as you get out there, because we're normally shaping operations for a kinetic event, right? Like, okay, you do your little influence, try before or afterwards, maybe a little deception, but then your operators are going to come in and take care of the military mission in between. This I saw it flipped on its head. So this is where the fictitious threat was cited. The security services prop up a fake, basically opposition government, who turns around and invites the Russian military in to provide protection against a non-existent threat that was largely not there. So
the Russians are so good at this.
Masterful. I would love to tell you otherwise. They made us look like clowns.
I mean, they've been good at this for a long time. right? I mean,
Disinformatica is what they call it. They are experts at this, and we are. I mean, on the U.S. side, it's all now being completely dismantled. By the way, on the U.S. in terms of the capability, I'll kind of hit that like in a second. So at the end, the troops would serve on the information operations side as what we would call a physical observable. So the troops were part of a larger information campaign. They were window dressing at the end. The entire battle was basically won in the information space, and the reason they said that they needed it, according to the security service, was that Sevastopol, which is in Crimea, which they seized, is where the Black Fleet is based out of, and they need the Black Fleet to have access to the Mediterranean to counter NATO forces in the Med. So that was the big concern, was losing that, which is why they want the Donbas for a land bridge as well to get into Crimea, which is just, it's nuts. And so I watched this kind of unfold, and then the information, and I think that's where they got the idea, or perfected it there, that they could conduct strategic information operations inside other countries. I'm not a Russia collusion guy. I don't. If the laptop was horseshit, I called it out. It was from as soon as I saw it. I don't believe that they impacted the elections, but they definitely did sow societal discord. Everybody's at each other's throats. Like that part you can see. The rest of the stuff and the accusations, they're baseless.
What about Ukrainian history? So again, the square, right? There's this sort of revolution that again the Russians are claiming it tipped them off. But like, give us some ground truth on like the actual Ukrainian politics and our involvement.
So in the Ukrainian political side, I think we've seen a couple of revolutions there over the years in terms of pro-Western or either neutral or more favorable towards Moscow in terms of their leaders. We saw Yulia Tymoshenko come and go. We saw Poroshenko in and out. We saw another, one of the presidents was our prime minister was poisoned, right? His face is peppered still with scars from it. That was when the Russians were busy poisoning people with nuclear material or toxins and whatever they were doing.
That was Ukrainian, or was that another Russian they got?
It was a Ukrainian so they killed a Russian in the UK, a former KGB officer who had fled and was there under asylum, essentially, and then they went after the Ukrainian president in Ukraine, and so it kind of went back and forth, and now you fast forward to from 2014 all the way up now through 2022 coming in, and for Putin, Ukraine was never supposed to be an independent state. This was core part of Russia. 1/3 of nuclear weapons were there. The center of the ballistic missile program and research is actually in Kharkiv in the area in Ukraine. Like this was core Russian territory. And if you look at the country, it's kind of split with the, portions used to be part of Poland. There's a Ukrainian speaking piece. There's a Russian speaking piece. There's Ukrainian Orthodox, small Ukrainian Catholic, Russian Orthodox. So it is kind of like a split line between East and West on that side. And there was always this like, which direction do we go? When I got there in 2014, it was a very cold Russian feeling, still like Eastern place. When I went back in 2022, this was a vibrant European city, and the Russian actions in 2014 actually pushed the Ukrainians further away in helping to solidify an identity and a people. They've been independent for 30 years. You can't just go walk into somebody's country and take it because you feel like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's core territory. Well, like Texas is core Mexican territory if you're in the early 1800s.
And that's the equivalent. You're right.
Spanish. Like, I mean, things change. So then, again, but I still want like an overview for listeners of Ukrainian politics at the time. Like 2014, like what's going on in Ukrainian politics and who wins out and how is and how does that compare? How does that truth compare to the sort of conspiracy that we hear that we inserted because we're so powerful? I always laugh at these things because I'm like, I wish we were that powerful. If we could just choose governments anywhere we wanted, it would make our lives a lot easier.
I mean, if there's anything, I'd encourage people to read a book called The Legacy of Ashes that was written about CIA covert influence operations, covert action, going back through the Cold War and everything else. I mean, there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of conspiracy theories out there, mainly from overseas, where they see the CIA behind everything. I had our Black Book of Special Programs for a long time. If anybody realized what the real capabilities were or the size of the institutions that we have to deal with these types of things, it would be the equivalent of ripping back the curtain with The Wizard and the Wizard of Oz at the end of it. Like, it's not what people think it is.
No, it's a reason more surprised about what we're not doing than what we are doing.
No, but to your point, the question you asked, I think, more specifically. So
what was really going on?
So what was really going on is that there was the government that was in power at the time wanted to sign the economic agreement with the EU. Right. It was popular with the people. But then the Russians sort of came in and said, we're not going to do this. And the president changed course at the time, the prime minister. So, and said, we're not going to do that. That caused a flare up with the Ukrainian people. And that's why there was the protest in what was called the Maidan, or the main square in Kyiv, with the barrels on fire and the protests and everything else. It was largely peaceful, the protest, but the government security services cracked down a little bit. Eventually, the governments cracked. Right, and they kind of gave in, and there was this moment where the Ukrainians had sort of felt they won, and there were several changes in administration after 2014, but it wasn't this U.S. heavy hand that came in and sort of influenced. This was the Ukrainian people had sort of felt that
They wanted to be more European.
and that's all it was. They wanted to be more
We're
European.
talking about an economic agreement, so there's some military agreements that come with that, but it's not like joining NATO.
No.
I mean, this is the thing that I always laugh at too, because I'm like, I mean, look, by our own assessments, it was, we from our own State Department and CIA was like, yeah, if they join NATO, it's a red line for Russia.
Yeah.
Got it. And people use that as this as this reasoning now to explain Russia's actions. And I always have to raise my hand and remind them, Ukraine was never joining NATO. Like just to be clear here,
Yep.
if they were in the process of joining NATO,
Yeah.
you might have a point, but it never happened. So what the hell are you talking about?
No.
And nobody's ever pushing for it either. I mean, it's just not.
No.
It hasn't been a thing.
No, I mean, and they've wanted to, sure. I mean, Poland's on the border. Do they share borders with other countries as well? The question nobody ever asked, the follow-up to that is, and you're 100% right, to your point, not that you need my affirmation, but you're 100% right. Why are countries that are even near the Russian border in general, why are they even seeking to join a defensive alliance that's NATO? Mm-hmm. And it's because Putin's been unchecked for the last 25 years. And I mean, this is a bipartisan criticism. It goes back to failure to really address Georgia in 2008. You got South Ossetia, Abkhazia, the Chechen wars, Eastern Europe, going back into even the Clinton administration, going back and how we handled Kosovo, Serbia, all that.
Yeah.
He's continued to creep up the escalatory ladder because nobody wanted to do anything about it. And this is the problem. Nobody needs or wants a war with Russia or another major power because we need another war like we need a hole in the head. I completely agree with you. Mm-hmm. But that's the whole point of holding adversaries or bad actors accountable at a lower level threshold. Because if you hold them accountable there and they realize they're going to get smacked a little bit if they do something dumb.
Yeah.
If you don't and they keep going, what you end up with is nearly 1 million dead people in Ukraine because the Russians decide to invade. Because
this is to explain this. I'm
Yeah.
like, look, if a bully keeps pushing you,
Yeah.
because sticking his finger in your chest and you just keep walking back, eventually, you're never going to stop walking back. Like you have to stop at some point. It's better to stop it earlier. And this is, for some reason, this is a concept that is impossible for many to understand. They'll instead argue that it's too escalatory to stop it at a lower level. And no, it's uncomfortable. Peace through strength is uncomfortable, but you got to remember the strength part. The strength part actually matters quite a bit. And so that's an interesting time to be in Ukraine then in 2014.
Definitely wild.
And then subsequent administrations and we have the situation we have now. What do you think about that? What are the chances? I mean, I do commend President Trump for wrangling what he needed to wrangle but not putting the ball in Putin's court.
Yeah.
Now, I think we all know what Putin wants to do with that ball. I'm not sure he wants to play. But it's hard to foresee how this plays out. How do you think?
No, I think you're 100% right. Again, how you characterize it. I think the Biden administration was hoping that the economic sanctions combination of that would eventually force Putin to the table and get there. We've had sanctions on Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Iran for 40 years. They've literally built sanctions busting mechanisms. So the pressure never amounted to a point where they would come to the table. So that was nonsensical. It wasn't going to happen. And unfortunately, like you said, it's unsustainable from a cost perspective in the long run. So something sort of needs to give. But Putin's been trying to pick negotiators. General Kellogg is a 3-star retired Green Beret Silver Star recipient out of Vietnam, commanded Special Operations Command Europe, was on the ground, Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. He's a serious adult while he's in there. And the Russians, we don't want him in the negotiation. Of course you don't, because you don't want somebody's going to hold you accountable.
Somebody knows what he's talking about. I saw him speak at the Munich Security Conference. He knows what he's talking about.
He's a good dude. Marco Rubio, as the Secretary of State, is a great guy. Mike Waltz is a great guy. Yeah. But I think they saw a seasoned elder statesman that they didn't sort of want in there. So I think they're trying to pick negotiations. They would like to get as much out of this as possible. So from what I was told in the background, they were actually so scared by the blow up between the president and President Zelensky over that situation because we actually we want to get to the table because we think we can get a deal that's going to give us more and be in our benefit if we sort of do that. So I think where the rub is that most Americans are trying to figure out is why is Zelensky's, why was there such a difference? Why was he being more demanding in the Oval Office? Here's what the situation is. The president basically was trying to figure out how to address a couple of things. From a Republican standpoint, there's always been a desire, conservatives, populists, all across the entire Republican spectrum, of how do we recover cash? How do we pay for this? It can't be a blank check in perpetuity, right? These loans. But if there was a mineral agreement, right? Because the rare earth elements, for those who are not familiar with it, if you hear the term, They're needed to conduct electricity on boards, and they're rare. But that sounds kind of dumb, but rare earth elements. They're mainly in China in terms of where they're located. You have some deposits in Afghanistan. There's some in Greenland, which is why that's up for discussion. And Ukraine has their own deposits, although it's largely in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine now. So the theory being that between gas and oil or minerals, that we could structure some sort of agreement where the U.S. would get an economic benefit back, which would then help pay for things, but then also give the U.S. an interest in why we should continue to care about Ukraine, because we need to protect our economic interest. From Zelensky's perspective, and a lot of folks who watch Russia, they say, hey, Putin has never honored any agreement he's ever signed. Unless there's a security guarantee, I don't think that's going to be enough on the economic side. And that's where the rub between our administration and the Zelensky team sort of came from. And now it looks like the middle ground might be the Europeans providing the security guarantee. Right. But that still keeps U.S. boots off the ground and out of there, which I think was very much a red line for both President Trump and for Vice President Vance.
Yeah. And it's a red line for pretty much the American people.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
And so we'll see where it goes. It was an interesting blow up in the White House. It just wasn't the time to have that discussion. That was the problem with how Zelensky went about that. Was, I heard about it and I was like, oh God, I got to watch this and see what happened. And Vance is really just answering a question. And now why they're taking so many questions in the White House? That's how President Trump likes to do it, but. He was just answering a question about the nature of diplomacy. Hey, we should try diplomacy. We've been at the war for 3 years. Let's try talking. That's all he said. And it wasn't the time to litigate whether Putin can be trusted or not. Like it's just let's just get it done. Let's just move step 1 and 2. A week later, we finally did get, or a week or two later, finally did get it done. Interesting. That's an interesting perspective, though, that the Russians were hoping to get to the table and actually concerned about.
Because they want their big deal. I mean, they wanted that out of it, and I got a little bit more on the whole reason for the blow up between the two of them in the Oval Office. So it had been a week before that. Kellogg was literally showing up at the train station in Kyiv, and the reporters are there waiting for him. And he just has to take questions about, I think Zelensky had made a comment that the president's living in a disinformation bubble. The president shot back and said, you're a dictator. Yeah. You need elections. The Ukrainian constitution forbids elections during wartime. Never mind the territory is occupied. And the last time the Russians ran a referendum in there, there was evidence of fraud out the wazoo. So that goes back and forth. He spends a week there, goes to go visit the military hospital, sees the wounded veterans, and his task was to go get a deal. And he's leaving. There was no deal in place. So they rushed a deal to him on the way out the door, and it wasn't signed. Because I believe from what I've been told, Yermak, who's the head of the presidential office, basically, it was Zelensky's entertainment lawyer when he was back before he was a politician, wanted the Oval Office moment. And so that's why when we heard the president saying to others, like, hey, this just should have been signed last week. What they meant was the agreement should have come back signed with General Kellogg so that the president could just sign it and be over with. But unfortunately, there was the desire for the moment, the office, and then the blow up like you were talking about afterwards. So, the president, that's what I try to remind folks of as a New Yorker. The president's a Queens boy. He grew up in Queens. He's been in construction for the last 50 years. And back in the 70s, 80s, the mob had a big, heavy hand in the construction firms. Not the president. He owned his own stuff. But he had to deal with those tough entities and those construction companies as he's building casinos and buildings and everything else. He learned to be a tough, ruthless negotiator. And so he presents his position. You don't want to take it? Not a problem. I'm going to pull all the levers of power I have available to me in my favor until you capitulate and you understand where I'm coming from. And so what I watched a 50-year businessman who has conducted some of the toughest negotiations on the business side, taking that tack, that approach to an international security side. And that's the approach he took with Zelensky. Okay, you don't want to agree with the terms I've given you? Not a problem. He pulled back on it. It was the aid, it was the money, it was the intelligence, everything else. And eventually there was an apology that came in a written letter, which is what he wanted, and a few things.
The same day.
The same day. And so I think the Russians have caught wise to that, right? And so you haven't seen these overt stance of, no, we won't take a ceasefire. Well, we want a ceasefire, but we want these nuances, right? Yeah. We still don't have one. Weeks later. The Russians, Putin is a very smart man.
Yeah, well, they're going to drag it out. It's in their interest to drag it out. We'll see what winning looks like. The thing is, I'm not sure what winning looks like for Putin in this case. They might get some concessions and say, okay, well, we can invade again in 10 years. Rebuild our army, rebuild our population. It's going to be tough since their demographics aren't so great. They're not going to have it's harder for them to recruit, but harder for Ukraine too. But also easier for Ukraine to build up the necessary defenses, which they've already done an amazing job of doing.
Right. I think you raise a brilliant point, though, when you come to it in terms of Putin not sure like what it looks like. I think he did it on purpose. If we go back to the beginning of the invasion, the war, We know because of the intelligence leaks that came out that this plan was to take Kyiv in 72 hours, the country would fall. If we go through and look at his statements, he has never overtly declared what his objective was in Ukraine because he was leaving himself time and space to figure out what he wanted to do. So he can come out of this and basically say, hey, we got the Donbass. These are the areas that are pro-Russian anyway. The rest of these people are all Western, brainwashed lunatics. We'll just take this and we'll be done. So he's left himself time.
Like his own internal politics, really.
Exactly.
In Russian misinformation world, because I mean they live in their own bubble.
Yeah.
And I guess that, the question for America is like, how do you make it? Because you got to let Putin go back to his people and say like, no, we're winning, but we also have to be like, well, no, he's really not. And I would say, look, if he doesn't get Kyiv, even if you end up with this, years long ceasefire, kind of like think like a North Korea, South Korea, like they're still at war technically. Never even signed the treaty actually. Yeah, that's true. It's all just but it's just been that way for a long time. You can imagine something similar in Ukraine, and again, from our strategic deterrence perspective. I wouldn't say that's a loss for us because like it's a big loss if you just give up on them and let them take Ukraine fully. Yes. Now they're on the border with 4 more NATO countries, and I'm like, you think that doesn't get us closer to war? Yeah. Like people are like, you're warmongering. I'm like, no, you're warmongering because you want a circumstance where there's a more intact Russian army that knows that we don't defend our allies. Yep. On the border with 4 more NATO countries. Yeah. Your scenario gets us closer to war. Yeah. So you're the warmonger. No, once again, I don't understand that.
Perfect analogy that you gave too, because we have a DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea for that reason. Exactly like you said, right? Is to make sure that there is a buffer to keep them away from each other, so this doesn't go back into a hot conflict. And we do not need a fully, equipped manned Russian army on the NATO borders, as you 100% said. So if people are worried about the U.S. getting dragged in, people misinterpret Article 5 all the time and everything else. Unless it's an attack on a NATO member in its own country, on its own soil, that doesn't apply. So if there's European troops who happen to be NATO members who are in Ukraine providing a security guarantee, that doesn't trigger an automatic requirement where somebody could say, hey, we were attacked, we're going to war with Russia. That is not the case. And your characterization is 100% right. If we're seen as abandoning the ally, let them go to the border, right? Putin got to this point because I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. We have failed to hold him accountable for 25 years. He's continued to push the envelope and everything else. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Everybody always uses that cliche. So if we know that 25 years of failing to hold him accountable has led to this moment, why should we expect anything different if we don't hold him accountable now? Yeah. You know what I mean? I think you're 100% right.
Let's change subject massively in the few minutes you have left. It's just interesting perspectives on Ukraine and your work there. My work is on cartels mostly. I just got back from Mexico last week. Okay. And it was my 3rd trip down there. And the biggest, there's a few big changes on this particular situation. Sure. President Trump designated them as terrorists. Yep. That's something we'd researched for a year or two. The first Trump administration decided not to do it. The reason they decided not to do it was because it gives asylum seekers crossing our border a better argument in asylum court that they're escaping terrorists. Right. But if you close down the border like Trump has, well, then that's no longer a concern. So, so it makes sense. But it also makes sense why they didn't do it the first term. I think they probably would have done it if they'd been reelected. Yeah. But I think they were. I'm pretty sure that was the conversation. So people always ask me about that, and I'm like, I'm telling you, there's pros and cons to it. Like those 100%. Are the cons. The pros are it opens up a few more capable, really higher sentencing. Yeah, like is mostly what it does. But it also sort of awakens the military. Now, did the military and the DoD has now started actual planning. I mean, I talked to Northcom. It's legit. A while ago, like a year or two ago, and I'm like, "What do you guys do on the cartel situation?" And they're like, "A whole lot of nothing." Yeah, totally accurate. And now it's totally different. Now, again, they could have done all of this before under a counter narcotics authority. Yeah, they really just didn't. They needed to be sort of instructed to, and I think that's what's happened. So major changes there.
100% right.
And then even you said, like in your work, because you guys deal with counterterrorism. Okay, well now. Yeah. All the counter-terrorist analysts out there are like, well, now we have to look at this.
Sure. No, so that's 100% right. So that the questions came up from a number of folks, and now we've looked at it from a counterterrorism perspective, dealing with the cartels. So there's a couple of things I think of note. Like to your point, what we've seen now, unmanned CIA drones doing collection. We've seen military signals intelligence aircraft flying over the top and providing targeting data to the Mexicans. The Mexican president, Sheinbaum, she's got like an 80% approval rating. There is zero appetite on the Mexican side from either the government standpoint or popularity-wise for unilateral U.S. action in Mexico. What does that mean to everybody listening? You're not going to see this like Halo jumps into Mexico to go, it's not Sicario, it's not the movie we're in right now. So at least in the short term, it doesn't appear that that's an issue. The cartels, from the information we're getting back, they're running scared leadership, they're in hiding. They're not sure really what's going to happen. The fentanyl labs where things are being produced are largely in Mexico. And speaking to our South American, Latin America team, even with the other designations of the gangs, it's not a South American problem. It is largely central to Mexico. And where the China comes in, because that's always a question, it's largely money laundering. Like that's where the money's being laundered on the fentanyl side. So between shutting the border down, collecting the intelligence, and then trying to get the Mexicans to act on it, it's definitely having a significant impact on a decrease in fentanyl. It just becomes a question in the long term. Cartels are about making money. They've largely left the U.S. alone from a violence standpoint and everything else, right? Because they don't want to draw attention. The money is drying up in some cases, right? Because the border is shut and everything else. So in the medium to long term, it's unclear what the impact will be. But in the short term, it's having an immediate impact on the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, the other big change is the Mexican administration. They're more open to they're not open to unilateral ops. Never will be.
Yep.
But there's a lot we can do between. I mean, the last administration
Agreed.
didn't even take any help.
Agreed.
It was frustrating, and so there's a massive window of opportunity for.
Yeah.
Frankly, what I think looks like a Ukraine security assistance initiative, but call it the North American Security Initiative.
Yeah.
And like there's a massive opportunity there that Mexicans will actually take.
Yeah, you're right.
It's for them. It's just resources. It's they need resources. They need eyes in the sky. They need the basic things you would need to beat back an insurgency, which is what they have.
Yeah, and the Mexican Marines, the Marina, those are the ones who are the primary strike force on the Navy that have really done well over the years. But to your point, there's been a degradation of the relationship with the federal law enforcement agencies on our side, on the U.S. With the Mexicans, there wasn't a lot of cooperation. There's a new sheriff in town, both in Mexico and as well in the U.S. in terms of Sheinbaum and Trump. So far the building is starting. It's going well as far as we can see from the outside. Jury's out on still how it goes long term, to your point, but like you said, there's a big chasm in between doing nothing and unilateral U.S. actions, and there's a lot of playroom in the middle there. So I think it'll depend on how the cartels react to it, and then how the Mexican government responds to it. Because I think President Trump is serious. Our border security is a major issue as it relates to human trafficking, drug smuggling, and it's the homeland, right? This is America first, and this is where the primary security concerns for him, lie. And so that's where they're going to put the emphasis. We have two, I believe, destroyers in the Caribbean right now along the Mexican border. For this. We don't even have that many usually in CENTCOM in the Middle East when we've got it going. So they're not playing games.
Yeah. And it was suggested to me, and I thought this was a good idea. You put some more of those shit, like a whole strike group in the Eastern Pacific, on the other side of Mexico, Baja California. Not for a long time. I mean, you need those in Indo-PACOM, but even just for like 6 months. Yeah. Just hammering interdiction ops, you can do a lot of damage, and it just forces change, puts them out of business, which pits them against each other. And there's a lot of interesting things that we can. That we can do now.
Sure.
That I think we just haven't had the opportunity to do before. So more to come on that. Those buzzers that keep going off me. I have to go to the vote. So
doing your duty.
Yeah. Alex, thanks so much for being on.
Appreciate it, Congressman. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.